Harry Lighton's full feature-length directorial debut, Pillion, based on the novel by Adam Mars Jones, Box Hill, A Story of Low Self-Esteem, is presented as a coming-of-age story from the perspective of introverted traffic warden Colin, whose ordinary life changes drastically when he meets the impossibly handsome, mysterious biker, Ray. This is ultimately a story of self-discovery, as Ray introduces Colin to the unfamiliar world of bikers and BDSM, a world which Colin seems to have an aptitude for, well, at least at first. In this video I'll summarize the film, explore Lighton's narrative choices, tell you how it differed from the novel, and ultimately, what I enjoyed and what I didn't, so don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. The film opens with both Colin and Ray travelling to the Checkers pub in their respective vehicles, Colin in a car and Ray on a bike. The pub is where they will unknowingly meet for the first time. What's striking about this opening is that the first thing we experience is not an image, but a sound, the growl of Ray's bike over a black screen. This choice immediately establishes the motorcycle as a central motif, but it also does something much more subtle. It forces us to follow Ray into the film. So before we even see him, we are guided by his presence, which mirrors Colin's eventual submission. From the very beginning, Ray establishes control. The opening shot also allows us an insight into both individuals, Colin being driven in the back of a car while absent-mindedly staring out of the window, a visual metaphor for how he's taken a back seat in his own life. And so, when he sees a glimpse of a motorcyclist zoom past, he notices, signaling an appetite for something new. Ray, on the other hand, roars through the night, a metaphor for how he effortlessly glides through life with an air of confidence. Down at the pub, Colin sings cheesy romantic classics with his barbershop quartet while Ray and his biker gang play darts and drink beer. Colin instantly notices the handsome Ray. However, the same could not be said for Ray, who doesn't even look up when Colin shakes his hat under his nose for donations. Or so it seems. Their first interaction is at the bar, where Ray interrupts Colin's order to ask the barmaid what flavour crisps they have. He then puts down a handful of change and watches to see how Colin reacts to his test of submission. Colin passes the test by counting out the right change, handing it over to the barmaid. Having passed the test, Ray leaves Colin his number and disappears into the night. And so begins Colin's initiation into life as Ray's sub, as well as to the fraternity of the queer BDSM biker gang, which finds its roots in the biker subculture of 70s Surrey. Let's talk about the way in which BDSM is presented in the film. What I really appreciated about Pillion is the way Lighton approaches the subculture without relying on it purely for shock value, which is often how BDSM tends to appear on screen, reduced to a visual shorthand for transgression rather than something lived, negotiated, or emotionally complex. I think the last time I saw a sub-dom dynamic on screen was the 50 Shades franchise, which presents a much more heteronormative dynamic since the main protagonists, Anna and Christian, are a straight couple, with Christian occupying the more dominant role, and Anna the more submissive, an expected dynamic which adheres to traditional normative gender ideals. Pillion, on the other hand, gives us a new take on the sub-dom dynamic, not only because the relationship is between two men, but also due to the role that love plays in both films. Unlike Anna's love for Christian, which gradually reshapes and softens him, Colin's love for Ray does not transform Ray into something more palatable or normative. It doesn't civilize him, and it certainly doesn't cure him. Christian's dominance is framed as something he is ashamed of, a byproduct of childhood trauma and abuse that he keeps hidden. As a result, Christian is ultimately willing to be swayed by Anna's desire for a more conventional romantic structure. Date nights, emotional vulnerability, physical affection, marriage, and children. Anna's love allows him to loosen his grip, to occasionally relinquish control and to let her take the lead in negotiating what their relationship should look like. In Pillion, however, Colin's love for Ray does none of this, and that's precisely the point. Ray's dominance is not treated as a flaw or a wound in need of healing. He is unabashedly and unapologetically a dom, and he is not interested in softening himself to fit a more recognizable romantic template. His predilection for dominance is presented as an integral part of who he is, not something to be outgrown or redeemed through love. Colin's affection, no matter how sincere, cannot change this, and the film refuses to pretend that it should. Let's talk casting. I'm a huge fan of Alexander Skarsgård and have watched nearly everything he's done. I think he's a phenomenal actor with incredible range, and so when I saw that he was chosen for an experimental project like Pillion on a fan account a year ago, I was sold, and have been counting down the months since, and he did not disappoint. I thought he was a brilliant choice to play Ray, as he excels at roles that require a silent, introspective, and controlled dominance. This can be seen in projects such as Hold the Dark, Little Drummer Girl, Mute, and Succession. Though I'm not that familiar with Harry Melling's career, bar his role as Dudley in the Harry Potter series, I thought he did Colin justice, bringing the duality necessary to play a character who at once is happy to play along as the grateful passive sub, but who at the same time stews a silent longing for something more. One of the biggest questions we're encouraged to ask is, what does Ray get out of Colin? Colin himself is baffled at how someone of Ray's caliber could go for someone as ordinary, young, and inexperienced as himself. In the novel, Ray tells Colin that he chose him because no one else would have him, a cruel blow which Colin commendably absorbs in his stride, reframing it as proof of his loyalty and usefulness, saying, "It's true, there's never been a Q, but Ray seemed to be getting at something else with that answer. My value to him was my loyalty. I belonged to him. It made me worth having, which meant that before me, someone in the past must have let him down." So instead of letting it destroy his self-worth, he uses it to speculate about Ray's past, evidence of how desperate he is to know anything about him. In the film, Ray's answer is much more flattering. Ray describes Colin as having an aptitude for devotion, as Colin obeys every demand, from grocery shopping, cooking, and sleeping on the floor. This line works to make Colin feel special, beloved, and noticed, as if he is the only one who holds the key to Ray's desires. What makes Colin excel as a sub is his ability to read Ray, a difficult job given how guarded he is. Colin's willing submission is rooted in his gratitude for being allowed to simply exist in Ray's orbit, even if it does mean being ignored, used, or sidelined at times. This sentiment carries into the film, particularly early on when Colin accepts Ray's emotional distance as part of the dynamic. However, by the end, that tolerance erodes. Colin wants to be seen, and when that need goes unmet, he rebels, stealing Ray's bike and riding off into the night. Ray is profoundly private about his personal life, familial relationships, and history. Lighton does scatter a few hints on screen, but we're not ever really supposed to fully understand him. I personally think that he's a father, possibly to 3 daughters named Ellen, Wendy, and Rosie, as the tattoos on his chest would indicate. This is cemented by the clothing he wears when he's not wearing his leather. In more relaxed scenes, such as a day off scene, he typically rocks a button-down shirt, casual joggers, and glasses, which cause him to look quite fatherly, which is what cemented the idea for me. Of course, an answer to Ray's past is not meant to be clear in any sense, but clarity isn't the point. Lighton has said that updating the story from the 1970s to the present was a deliberate choice. Had the film remained in the 70s, Ray's secrecy could easily be explained away by societal repression. In the modern setting, there is no such excuse. Ray's mystery remains unsolved, intentionally. One of the biggest mysteries, however, is why he disappears at the end with no explanation. In the book, Ray dies after crashing his bike into a tree, a complete shock to both the reader and Colin considering how careful he is as a rider. In the film, however, Ray disappears after indulging Colin's desire for a day off from BDSM, spending the day doing normal couple things such as going for a walk and catching a film instead. At the end of the day off sequence, Ray and Colin share a kiss, a complete shock since Ray doesn't really do kisses, and it seems to me that Ray's disappearance is a result of that kiss, as it kinda leaves him confused. if facial expressions are anything to go by. I read the disappearance in 3 ways. Firstly, he may be disgusted or disturbed by the kiss, by the boundary it crosses, and leaves as a result. On the other hand, however, he might have actually enjoyed the kiss, causing him to second-guess everything he thought he knew about himself. This realization may have thrown him so off guard that he felt he needed to either run away from this feeling or take some time to process it away from Colin. The third assumption comes from something Alexander Skarsgård said in an interview, and that is that Ray's disappearance could be read as sadistic. Perhaps he felt a sexual thrill by hurting Colin emotionally rather than physically. Or maybe it was simply the ultimate punishment for Colin's earlier transgression with the bike. On the other hand, his disappearance could be read as the most humane thing he could have done for Colin. Upon sensing how happy the kiss makes Colin, Ray realizes that Colin actually needs a much more normative relationship filled with physical intimacies such as kissing and dates, something that Ray cannot provide for him. And so, Ray does the kindest thing by breaking things off before Colin becomes too attached. There's also the possibility that Ray simply returns to another life, perhaps to his daughters, and that Colin was always meant to be a temporary escape. Whatever the reason for Ray's disappearance, it shouldn't be read into too much except for what it means to Colin's character arc, because after all, the story is Colin's. Though Ray has such a commanding and necessary presence to the film, he simply exists as a foil to highlight Colin's progress, and so there is no real reason for us to know what goes on in Ray's interiority between the hours of 7 and 6, which are the hours when Colin must leave Ray's apartment so that he can get on with his life. Let's talk a little bit about the day off scene. I wasn't sure what to make of the scene at first. Initially, I wasn't a fan because I thought the shock of seeing a completely new and open side to Ray took me out of the story a bit too much, because I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. But then, I realized that is precisely the point. In the day off scene, Ray indulges Colin's request for a day off from BDSM, a day when, as I mentioned, they can engage in normal couple activities. Ray abandons his fitted leather for a billowy plaid shirt, which makes him blend into the urban crowd rather than stand out. In addition to the change in clothing, Ray's relaxed demeanor and willingness to hand over agency to Colin for a change also threw me off guard and made the scene feel quite tense and unbalanced, which I guess was the point. I think what added to the tense atmosphere was that I was anticipating some kind of punishment for the night before when Colin rides off with the bike, and I wasn't sure what this would look like since Ray is so calm and measured, and punishments traditionally implies a kind of outburst or a loss of composure, which I just couldn't imagine coming from Ray. So all in all, this anticipation of some kind of outburst only heightened my unease. In an interview about the day off sequence, Lighton talks about how they filmed it using hidden long lens cameras to make the scene feel more like a documentary, as we're encouraged to observe the pair out of their regular dynamic. I think the change in long lens camera also adds to the heightened tension, as we're quite removed and distanced from the two as they lose themselves in the hustle and bustle of the London crowd. A far cry from the more intimate and closed-off setting of the pub and Ray's modest apartment. It really did feel like we could lose them at any time, which I guess was the idea. I personally wasn't a fan of the scene where Ray and Colin practice their scales, getting 2 random strangers to judge who has the better voice. They naturally pick Colin's. I understand why this scene is quite a standout for most, as we get to view Ray from an outsider's perspective, and the view that we get is one which humanizes him and knocks him down from the pedestal that Colin has placed him on. It ultimately encourages us to view him as, well, fallible and flawed and human, a far cry from perfect, controlled and godlike, which is how the screenplay sets it up to appear. And so, I guess I felt quite unnerved when this setup of Ray gets compromised in the matter of a scene. Again, I'm guessing that this was what Lighton was hoping to achieve, but it had already been achieved by the preceding day off montage of them at the mall and cinema, which already worked to make us feel quite tense, uncertain, and on the edge of our seats. And so the specific scene with the strangers felt quite superfluous and overindulgent to the point when it really took me out of what was happening. Besides this small hiccup, in retrospect, I think that the day off scene was necessary as it not only reconfigurates our perception of Ray, but it also provides a refreshing alternative to what, at this point, had been quite a settled and comfortable dynamic in their relationship. If the goal of the day off scene was to make us feel unnerved and tense, then this was successfully achieved. What is commendable about director Harry Lighton is that he doesn't want to make the story too easy for us, and this I appreciate. It would have been easy for Lighton to have given us the happy ending expected from the rom-com genre, with boy and girl, or in this case boy and boy, ending up together after a brief stint apart as they realize they are meant to be. The subversion of the rom-com genre is something that stood out to me when I watched interviews with Harry Lighton about this film as something intentional. Even the idea of Colin choosing himself at the end over a boy is quite a rom-com cliché. However, even this is thrown on its head as Colin doesn't choose himself. He's forced to because Ray leaves him, compelling him to take some time discovering himself as well as his sexual interests. Either way, easy is not something Lighton had in mind for this film. Whether that was setting the story in the present so that Ray's mysterious aura can't be explained away by the sexual taboos of the 70s, which would have required Ray to keep his sexuality under wraps anyway. Lighton also avoids using queerness or BDSM as a shorthand for difference. Their relationship is unusual even within the Dom sub-community, as we see that they are the only couples within the biker group who don't kiss and cuddle. Overall, Colin's arc kinda mirrors the traditional hero's journey. The story begins with Colin living quite a content, safe, and unassuming life. That is, before he meets mentor-like figure, or figures, Ray and the other bikers, who open up his world and expose him to the world of BDSM, which he grows to enjoy and accept. He faces some trials and tribulations along the way, mainly his mum's death, which is important to his progress as the brief yet tender aftercare he receives from Ray following her death, i.e. letting him sleep in his bed, triggers a dormant need for intimacy. He voices this need for normalcy and intimacy to Ray, who at first rejects it, which then leads him to rebel by driving off into the night on his bike. A small victory follows as Ray agrees to trial a day off from BDSM and lets Colin take some agency in planning it however he likes. Though awkward at first, they seem to find some rhythm and their day off ends in an exuberant kiss. Death of a mentor follows as Ray disappears with no warning or explanation, forcing Colin to evaluate his relationship with Ray as well as consider what he wants out of his life, something he wouldn't have had to do if Ray was still in his life, telling him what to do. Self-actualization and freedom are achieved at the end as Colin finally takes some ownership of his life and sets up a dating account, vocalizing what he wants in a future relationship. A continuation of sub-dom dynamics, a day off from the dynamic once a week, and agency over what he does with his hair. Overall, Colin's ability to vocalize his boundaries at the end shows that he has come a long way from the bumbling and awkward man we see at the beginning of the film, who doesn't really believe he can say no to Ray. Ray may have disappeared from his life, however he doesn't leave him in the lurch. He leaves him having broadened Colin's horizons, confident in his instincts, and ultimately prepares him to be the perfect submissive, something we see evidence of right at the end when, upon meeting up with a guy from the dating app and noticing his laces are untied, immediately and without prompt, he bends down to tie them up. What Ray ultimately provides for Colin is an education in self-worth and confidence, and the ability to see potential and value in his own identity, boundaries, and voice. The ending can therefore be read as a positive rather than a negative, as Boy becomes hero, a master of himself and his desires. Ultimately, Pillion is not a film about whether Colin and Ray should have ended up together, or even about whether Ray's disappearance can be neatly explained. Those questions, tempting as they are, feel beside the point. What Lighton gives us instead is a story about what it means to be shaped by a relationship that was never designed to last, and about the strange, often uncomfortable ways growth can occur within unequal dynamics. Considering that this was Lighton's first full feature-length directorial debut, I thought it was commendable and I can't wait to see what happens to the film come awards season. Thank you for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel.